My boss had known me for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He still didn't know my name. To be fair, he knew a name. Just not the right one. Good morning, Sandra. My name was not Sandra. It had never been Sandra. It would never be Sandra. But I smiled anyway, because smiling was cheaper than correcting him, and I'd learned early that correcting my boss, Elliot Grayson, came with consequences that included passive-aggressive emails, last-minute deadlines, and the kind of silence that screamed "You'll regret this." "Good morning, sir," I replied, placing his coffee on the desk at the exact angle he liked. Handle facing right, foam untouched, sugar packet unopened because he liked to pretend he didn't need it. He squinted at the screen, waved me away, and muttered something about spreadsheets and incompetence that I chose not to internalize, because if I did, I'd be crying into the office printer by noon. I turned to leave. "Oh, Sandra." "Yes, sir." Again. "Not Sandra. Cancel my 11 o'clock. And remind, he snapped his fingers. "What's his name? Tall fellow. Looks confused." "That would be everyone, sir." He frowned. "The one from marketing." "Daniel." "Yes, him. Tell him to stop sending me ideas that look like they were made during a power outage." I nodded, wrote it down, and walked out, heels clicking in the rhythm of someone who had perfected the art of endurance. 3 years. Same office. Same boss. Same invisible existence. And today, I was going to quit. I had planned my resignation like a bank heist. Step 1, print the letter. Step 2, leave it on his desk. Step 3, walk out with dignity. Step 4, cry in the bathroom of a cafe 2 blocks away. Simple, elegant, emotionally unstable, but manageable. I stared at the printed letter in my hand while hiding in the stationery room, the only place in the office where no one ever came unless the printer was on fire. Dear Mr. Grayson, I am writing to formally resign from my position as executive assistant. I stopped reading. I'd rewritten it 7 times. Each version sounded either too bitter or too grateful, and I refused to let him think I was either. I folded the letter, slid it into a cream envelope, and took a deep breath. This was it. I stepped out and collided directly with the man himself. "Whoa," Elliot said, grabbing my arm to steady me. His touch was brief, professional, and annoyingly grounding. "Careful, Sandra." Something in me snapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a thread finally giving up after being stretched too long. "My name," I said slowly, "is not Sandra." He blinked. Once. Twice. Then he laughed. "Oh, come on. You've never corrected me. That doesn't mean I didn't notice." He tilted his head, studying me in a way he never had before, not as furniture, not as an extension of his calendar, but as a person who had just said no. "Well then," he said. "What is it?" I looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time in 3 years, I said my name out loud to my boss. "It's Mara." Something flickered across his face. Recognition. Shock. Regret. Before I could tell, his phone rang. He released my arm. "We'll talk later." No, we wouldn't. Because in 10 minutes, I was leaving. I waited until he was in a meeting. I always knew his schedule better than he did, irony so sharp it could cut glass. I walked into his office, placed the envelope neatly in the center of his desk, and straightened the picture frame he never noticed was crooked. Then I turned to go. "Mara." I froze. Slowly, I turned around. Elliot stood in the doorway, meeting adjourned early, eyes locked on the envelope. He said my name again. Correctly. My stomach dropped. "What's that?" he asked. I exhaled. "My resignation." Silence stretched between us. Then he laughed. Not amused. Not mocking. Disbelieving. "You're not quitting." "I am." "Why?" The audacity of the question nearly took me out. "Because," I said carefully, "I've given you 3 years of my life, sir. I run this office. I manage your chaos. I anticipate your needs. And you still don't know my name." "That's not." "It is," I cut in. "And today, I choose myself." He stared at me like I just flipped gravity upside down. "You can't leave," he said quietly. I already have. And then, the plot twisted. He smiled. A slow, knowing smile. You can't, he repeated. Because your contract doesn't end today. I frowned. What contract? He picked up the envelope. You should have read the fine print, Mara. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't just an assistant. I was something else entirely. If you love slow burn tension, workplace chaos, and women choosing themselves in the messiest ways possible, subscribe to Moment and Moonlight, because stories like this don't behave, and neither do we. You're bluffing, I said. I don't bluff, Elliot replied. I strategize. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file. My file. How do you have that? I asked. You work for me. I assist you, I corrected. That doesn't mean you own my paperwork. Read Clause 14. I snatched the file, flipped through pages I had never seen before, and there it was. A clause buried under legal jargon and font size designed to discourage curiosity. In the event of early resignation, employee agrees to a transition period of 90 days, subject to executive discretion. 90 days. You never showed me this. You signed it. I signed a one-page offer letter. And that letter referenced the full agreement. I looked up, furious. You tricked me. No, he said softly. You trusted me. That hurt more than I expected. So what now? I asked. You stay, he said, for 90 days. And then, he met my gaze. Then you can leave. Something told me that by then, everything would be different. From that day on, everything changed. He said my name. Every time. Mara, can you? Mara, I need. Mara, stay. He asked questions. Listened. Noticed. And worst of all, he laughed at my jokes. That was dangerous. Because I'd spent years convincing myself he was unlovable. Now he was human. And humans were harder to escape. For more stories that blur the line between power, vulnerability, and unexpected connection, subscribe to Moment and Moonlight. The first rule of surviving the 90-day transition period was simple. Do not fall in love with your boss. The second rule was harder. Do not notice when he suddenly starts seeing you. Elliot noticed everything now. He noticed when I switched from heels to flats on Wednesdays because the meetings ran long. He noticed when I stopped taking sugar in my coffee. He noticed when I went quiet. Mara, he said one afternoon, leaning against my desk like a man who had just discovered posture. You didn't correct the report. It didn't need correcting. You always correct things. People evolve, I replied. He studied me. You're leaving, he said. In 87 days. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. By week 2, the office knew something was different. Daniel from marketing whispered too much. HR stopped avoiding eye contact. And someone, I suspected finance, started a betting pool. $5 says they're sleeping together. 10 says she's his secret wife. 20 says she's quitting because she's pregnant. I nearly choked on my water. When Elliot overheard one of the whispers, he didn't shut it down. He laughed. Which, in hindsight, was the first red flag. You need to attend the board dinner, Elliot said, flipping through his tablet. That's not in my job description. You're still employed. For now. He looked up. You'll be there. I sighed. As what? Your assistant. He paused. No, he said. As my date. I laughed. He didn't. I'm not doing that. The board respects optics. I respect my sanity. They'll question your absence. They'll survive. They already think we're involved. I stood. Then correct them. He leaned back, calm, infuriating. Or we could control the narrative. I stared at him. You're unbelievable. You'll wear something black, he added. Simple. Elegant. You've thought about this. Strategically. I pointed at him. I will not fake date my boss. He smiled. It's not fake. The silence that followed was loud enough to knock over egos. If you enjoy stories where boundaries blur and power dynamics get deliciously complicated, subscribe to Moment and Moonlight, because tension deserves a home. I wore the dress. Not because of Elliot. Because I looked good. The restaurant was expensive in the way that whispered money instead of shouting it. Crystal glasses. Low lighting. People who said things like, circling back, in real life. Elliot stood when I approached. That alone unsettled the table. This is Mara, he said. He hesitated. And that hesitation, that was new. Partner, he finished. I nearly dropped my clutch. The board smiled too quickly. One woman narrowed her eyes. Partner, she echoed. Yes, Elliot said smoothly. In life and business. My heart slammed against my ribs. We had not agreed to this. Under the table, I kicked him. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached over and laced his fingers with mine. Warm. Steady. Terrifying. Halfway through dessert, the woman who'd been watching me finally spoke. Where did you say you were from, Mara? I opened my mouth. Elliot answered first. She grew up overseas. I turned to him sharply. I didn't tell you that. He met my eyes. You didn't have to. Something cold slid down my spine. After dinner, as we stood outside under the city lights, I pulled my hand free. How did you know that? He exhaled. Because, he said, I've known who you are longer than you think. What does that mean? He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, Elliot Grayson looked unsure. You weren't hired by accident, Mara. The ground tilted. I interviewed for this job. Yes. You chose me. Yes. Because I was qualified. He didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, everything I thought I understood began to unravel. This story is only getting deeper. If you want first access to chapters that change everything, subscribe to Moment and Moonlight, where twists don't announce themselves. The next morning, I arrived early. Earlier than usual. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that encourages bad decisions. I unlocked Elliot's office using the code I absolutely should not have known. His desk was neat. Too neat. But the cabinet was open. And inside, another file. Not labeled with my name. Labeled with my mother's. My hands shook as I opened it. Records. Photos. Dates. And a note in Elliot's handwriting. If she ever asks, tell her the truth. I swallowed. Because the truth, it seemed, had been waiting for me longer than Elliot ever had. When Elliot walked in and saw the file in my hands, he didn't yell. He didn't panic. He closed the door. I was going to tell you. When? I demanded. After the 90 days. Why? Because once you know, he said quietly, you might never forgive me. My voice cracked. Try me. He took a breath. Your mother saved my life. The room went still. Years ago, he continued. Before this company. Before the money. She made a decision that cost her everything. I stared at him. And you hired me because of that? Yes. And pretended not to know my name? He looked away. Because knowing it would have made this harder. The silence swallowed us whole. And suddenly, quitting my job felt like the smallest decision I'd ever made. People thought money made things lighter. It didn't. It made them heavier. Elliot Grayson wasn't just rich. He was the kind of rich that changed laws quietly, moved markets with a sentence, and had entire floors of buildings named after foundations instead of people. Multi-billionaire rich. Which meant that if he said my mother had saved his life, it wasn't a metaphor. It was a debt. And billionaires didn't carry debts lightly. She was a lawyer, he said, breaking the silence. A very good one. The kind who didn't ask how much you were paying before deciding whether something was right. My laugh came out wrong. That sounds like her. She represented me when I had nothing but an idea and a problem powerful people wanted buried. I folded my arms. What kind of problem? The kind that gets men like me erased before we become men like this. He gestured vaguely, the glass walls, the skyline, the empire humming beneath our feet. She refused a settlement, he continued. Refused a bribe. Refused to look the other way. I swallowed. And what happened to her? His jaw tightened. She lost everything. The room felt smaller. She never told me, I whispered. She didn't want you to carry it. Well, I snapped, congratulations. You carried it straight into my life instead. I hired you because I wanted to give something back, Elliot said. Security, opportunity, distance from the mess. So you pretended I was invisible? I pretended I was neutral. That's worse. He didn't argue. When I became a billionaire, he added quietly, I tried to fix what happened to her. And she was already gone. That landed harder than I expected. My mother had died thinking the world forgot her. And the man who owed her everything had been standing 3 feet away from me for 3 years, calling me Sandra. You don't get to rewrite history, I said. And you don't get to play savior. I know. Then why keep me here? He met my eyes. Because you don't see me the way everyone else does. I scoffed. Trust me, I see you. No, he said. You see the man, not the myth. That was the problem. If you love stories where power doesn't protect people from consequence, subscribe to Moment and Moonlight, because wealth doesn't erase wounds, it exposes them. The article dropped on a Tuesday. They always did. Grayscale Global CEO in secret relationship with employee. I read it twice. Then a third time. Then I laughed, hysterically, dangerously, because the worst part? They got the details wrong. Wrong name. Wrong timeline. Wrong motive. But the photos. Painfully right. Board dinner. Hand-holding. The angle of his body toward mine. I stormed into Elliot's office. You let this happen. No, he said. Someone else did. And you're calm because? Because this was inevitable. I stared. You planned for scandal? He stood. I planned for war. The board member. The one who watched me too closely. Her name was Maribel Shaw, heir to old money, architect of quiet destruction. She knew your mother, Elliot said. That stopped me cold. She hated her, he continued. Your mother exposed her family. My chest tightened. And now she wants leverage. I laughed bitterly. So she uses me. She thinks you're my weakness. And are you? He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. It happened accidentally. Late night. Too much truth. Not enough space. His hand brushed mine. Neither of us pulled away. Mara, he murmured. Don't, I said. This is messy. Yes. And unethical. Also yes. And temporary. That one hurt. He leaned closer anyway. And then, my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. She didn't just save him. She destroyed someone else. Ask him who paid the price. The air shifted. I stepped back. What is it? Elliot asked. I looked at him. At the man my mother saved. At the empire built on survival. And wondered who didn't make it out. This is the point where stories turn. If you want the truth before the characters do, subscribe to Moment and Moonlight. Some revelations don't wait. Who paid the price? I asked. Elliot's face changed. Just slightly. Enough. You didn't tell me everything, I said. He exhaled slowly. No. Who suffered so you could stand here? Silence. Then. My brother. The word landed like glass. He took the fall, Elliot continued. Legally. Publicly. Completely. I stepped back. Your brother went to prison. Yes. And my mother helped make that happen? She didn't know, he said quickly. She thought she was protecting the innocent. And she was. Yes, he agreed. But not everyone. The room felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. So you hired me, I said slowly, not just out of gratitude. No. But guilt. Yes. And now. And now, he said, voice barely steady, the truth is catching up to all of us. I went home that night and packed a bag. Not because I was quitting, because I was preparing. I wasn't just an assistant. I wasn't just a favor. I was the daughter of a woman who changed history quietly, and someone was trying to rewrite it. My phone buzzed. A final message from the unknown number. You think you're the pawn. You're actually the checkmate. I smiled. They had no idea. I didn't quit. That was the first thing Elliot noticed. By the fourth morning after the article dropped, my desk was still occupied. My coffee mug was still there. My pen was still placed parallel to the notepad the way it always had been. The office moved around me the same way it always had, except now people watched me like I was an unsolved problem. Elliot watched me like I was a loaded one. You should take time off, he said, standing beside my desk, voice low. This has become complicated. I smiled without looking up. My job has always been complicated. You just noticed. There it was again, that look. The one that said he was realizing, far too late, that the quiet woman who ran his life had also been learning how it worked. Behind the glass walls of that building, Elliot Grayson was untouchable. Multi-billionaire. Market mover. Philanthropic genius with a carefully curated reputation. Men like him didn't fall. They were dismantled, slowly, by people who understood leverage. People like assistants. Maribel Shaw made her next move 3 days later. The board called an emergency meeting. Compliance, ethics, conflict of interest. Words designed to sound neutral while cutting deep. I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't. Assistants weren't stakeholders, until they were evidence. Elliot stood to leave his office, jacket immaculate, expression calm in that billionaire way that came from knowing the building, the board, and most of the laws bent slightly in your favor. Mara, he said, hesitating. Stay here. I finally looked up at him. No, I said. You don't get to decide that anymore. He frowned. This isn't a game. I know, I replied. That's why I've already won the first round. He stared at me like he was trying to remember a detail he'd overlooked. I didn't explain. I never did my best work out loud. While the board debated optics upstairs, I worked. Quietly. Methodically. I pulled calendar archives that went back years. Cross-referenced emails labeled non-essential. Found expense reports that told stories no one thought to read. Maribel Shaw was careful, but she was arrogant. Old money always was. She assumed silence erased history. It didn't. By the time Elliot returned, face tight, tie loosened, I had compiled a timeline that told a very different story than the one currently trending online. They want me to suspend you, he said. Temporarily. To calm investors. I handed him the folder. Read page 7. He did. Then page 9. Then 12. His expression shifted, not fear. You knew, he said slowly. I suspected, I corrected. Then I confirmed. Maribel hadn't leaked the story to expose him. She'd leaked it to distract from herself. The offshore accounts. The shell charities. The money quietly siphoned from foundations bearing Elliot's name but not his oversight. She'd used his reputation as camouflage. You can't take this to the board, he said. I know. Because it implicates you, I finished. By proximity. By trust. By negligence. He laughed once, breathless. You're terrifying. I smiled. You hired me. That night, Maribel called me. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She offered. A settlement. A number so large it felt fictional. Enough to disappear comfortably. Quietly. Respectably. You're smart, she said. You don't want to stand between titans. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the city my mother had once walked through without armor. My mother stood between titans, I said. And she didn't get paid. Silence. Then Maribel laughed. You think this ends well for you? I think, I replied, you underestimated the help. The next board meeting was private. Elliot didn't speak much. I did. Not officially. Not loudly. But every document placed carefully in front of the right person had my fingerprints on it. Every question that landed like a trap had been preloaded weeks ago, disguised as routine admin. Maribel resigned before lunch. Publicly, it was health reasons. Privately, it was survival. When it was over, Elliot sat in his office, staring out at the skyline like a man seeing it for the first time. "You could have destroyed me," he said. "I still could," I replied easily. "Why didn't you?" "I thought of my mother. Of what it cost her to do the right thing without power. Of what it meant to do it with power. Because," I said, "I wanted you to live with it." He turned to me then, really turned, billionaire defenses stripped bare. "You're not leaving, are you?" I picked up my bag. "Oh, I'm leaving," I said. "Just not the way you thought." I walked to the door, paused, and looked back. "For the record," I added, "you learned my name too late." He nodded. "I know." And as I stepped into the elevator, not as an assistant, not as a favor, but as a woman who understood systems and chose when to exit them, my phone buzzed with a notification. Moment and Moonlight, new subscriber confirmed. I smiled. Some stories didn't end. They simply changed hands. The elevator doors closed softly, sealing me inside a silence that felt earned. For the first time in years, no one needed anything from me. That was the lie I told myself as the car descended. My phone buzzed again before I reached the lobby. A message from an unknown number, the same one that had been haunting the edges of my life like a narrator who refused to stay hidden. "You left too early." I didn't respond. I stepped out into the sunlight, the city roaring around me, unaware that I had just walked away from a man who owned more buildings than most people own shoes, and from a truth that still hadn't finished unfolding. I spent the next week pretending I was free. I slept late. I drank coffee slowly. I answered emails for myself instead of someone else. People congratulated me for being brave, which always sounded like a polite synonym for "you're about to regret this." On the 8th day, Elliot found me. He didn't call. He didn't text. He showed up at the small cafe near my apartment, the one with the crooked sign and the burnt croissants, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than my rent and an expression that looked unfamiliar on his face. Uncertain. "You're hard to replace," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. I didn't look up from my cup. "That's not my problem anymore. I didn't come to ask you back. That got my attention." "Then why are you here?" "Because Maribel isn't finished." Of course she wasn't. "She disappeared quietly," he continued. "Too quietly. Old money doesn't retreat unless it's repositioning." I leaned back. "You're a multi-billionaire. Handle it." "I can't," he said. "Not without you." I laughed. "That's rich." "So am I," he replied. "And it hasn't helped." That was when he told me the part he'd never said out loud. Maribel hadn't just been siphoning money. She'd been building something, an acquisition designed to collapse Grayscale Global from the inside. A delayed detonation. One final move scheduled to trigger automatically, using credentials only one person in the company had ever touched. "Mine." "You're kidding," I said. "I wish I were." I stared at him. "You're telling me your entire empire is about to implode because I once organized your passwords?" "You organized everything," he said quietly. "I just signed things." There it was. The final truth. I hadn't been hired because of gratitude alone, or guilt, or even strategy. I'd been hired because my mother taught me how to survive systems designed to crush people quietly, and Elliot, whether he knew it or not, had been outsourcing his conscience to me for years. "You trusted me more than yourself," I said. "Yes. And now?" "Now," he said, "I'm asking you to save me." I finished my coffee. Then I stood. "Let's go," I said. We worked for 48 hours straight. No offices. No assistants. No board. Just two people in a rented conference room, laptops open, tension thick enough to chew. I traced digital trails, unraveled permissions, found the dead man switches Maribel had buried like landmines. She was brilliant. Ruthless. But she'd made one mistake. She'd assumed I was replaceable. At 3:17 a.m., I shut my laptop. "It's done." Elliot exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for decades. He looked at me then, not as a boss, not as a billionaire, not as a debt. Just as a man. "What do you want?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "I want my mother's name cleared," I said. "Publicly. I want her story told. I want the foundation in her name funded properly. And I want a seat on the board, not as your assistant, not as your partner, but as myself." "And us?" he asked, softer now. I smiled. "We'll see if you can keep up." The press release went live the next morning. Maribel's schemes exposed. Elliot's empire intact. And buried inside the corporate headlines was a smaller story, about a woman who had once stood alone against power and lost everything, finally being remembered. My mother. When the dust settled, Elliot asked me to dinner. Not as optics. Not as strategy. As a question. I said yes. Not because he was powerful, but because he finally understood what power cost. And as I walked into the restaurant that night, phone buzzing with notifications from readers discovering the story on Moment and Moonlight, I realized something quietly, completely, beautifully ironic. My boss never learned my name until the day I tried to leave. But the world learned it the day I stayed long enough to change the ending. If you believe in stories where women rewrite the narrative and walk away with more than they were offered, subscribe to Moment and Moonlight. Some endings are just beginnings in disguise.